Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Lift Every Voice Book Club, and we're delighted to be back again this month. I'm joined, as usual, by my wonderful co-host, Claudia Love Mair, and this month we are featuring the Reverend Dr. Luther Smith's book, beautiful book, Hope is Here, Spiritual Practices for Pursuing Justice and Beloved Community. And Dr. Smith's current research focuses on the writings and correspondence of Howard Thurman, advocacy on behalf of children, and the spirituality of hope, which will be our focus. Smith is an ordained elder in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and he retired from Candler University in 2014. So welcome, Luther. It's really a delight and a joy to be here with you to discuss this beautiful, hopeful, hope-filled book.
Thank you. So good to be with you. And I've been anticipating this time, Christine, with you and with Claudia.
Thank you. Luther, you began with a story about how you and your father were startled by the word hope that's elevated above the word love in a preacher's sermon. Could you tell us about that time and that story, and how the shift to hope, to elevating hope, began in your own life?
Yes. As I say, my father had listened to this sermon where the preacher concluded that perhaps in light of what is happening both nationally, locally, and internationally, that as we focus on 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul says of faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love, the preacher concluded, perhaps in light of all that we're experiencing, the greatest for us at this time is hope. And this, of course, we had never heard before. That it felt as if we were not being forced to agree as much as we were being offered another way to perceive the significance of hope, and to not just see it as a second class or third class virtue in relationship to love. And I then struggled to understand what makes this greatness of hope. I have never wanted to really focus on which is greater, hope or love. To me, it's not that kind of competition. But this whole matter of the way in which hope is great, I think has been in some way reduced to matters of wishfulness and desire, and the anticipation of something that will make everything right. And over the years, I would hear people speak about the sense of hope in these ways. You're behind in a volleyball game, and you hope you will win and come back. And even these rather serious matters of the way in which we hope we will decimate our enemy because our cause is so virtuous, and we really need this victory. And it felt as if hope has been so characterized as something that brings to us what we so desperately want, which failed for me understanding a greatness about hope. We've reduced hope, it felt to me, to be more of a servant to what we want, to address our fears, our anxieties. And I understand that. It's part of language, to understand how words get used in a variety of ways. I know love is a deep virtue and force, but we say, I love ice cream. And when we say something like that, it's very different than this deeper meaning of love itself. And speaking about God is love, and how love transforms life and creation. And even the poets who will speak about creation itself is an act of love. So what is this greatness of hope that is lost to us? And it led me to really struggle with what that is. And I believe to identify that hope enlivens us to God.
Yes.
And it's always traveling with love. So there's no need to try to raise one above the other in terms of greatness. If you are looking at hope, you're also looking at love being there. If you're looking at love, you're looking at hope being there. And as you try to describe one or the other, it becomes even difficult, I think, at times to distinguish what characterizes hope that may be distinct from love. So this has been really helpful to me personally. And as I'm discovering with persons, it's helpful to have this awareness of a deeper understanding of hope that really, I think, empowers discipleship, empowers our capacity to take seriously that hope is not just something coming over the horizon, or it's not just found in what's happening in laboratories to cure the illnesses that plague us. And it's not just about military power that's going to make a difference in a situation. There may be elements of hope that's related to all of that, but it's much deeper than that. And it's available to us now, for us now, transforming us and not just realities. And I think at times that's a transformation that proves to be more disturbing than comforting.
Yeah, thank you.
That's beautiful. And I'm just going to ask you to break open something you said towards the beginning about hope, because you said, I've come to understand the greatness of hope comes not when we treat it as a possession, but when we are possessed by hope. And I was really taken by that little shift in the imagery. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about what does it mean to be possessed by hope, and how is that different than treating it as a possession or an object or something like that?
Yes. I characterize hope as a force of God. It's literally a force, like love is a force. The creative power of love is because it's a force. And when I use the word force, I'm using it in its most, I think, fundamental and descriptive sense, and that is its capacity to achieve purpose. Some people, when they hear the word force, only think in the negative terms of how forces are used, and abuses that occur out of force. But this is power. It's a way by which reality is shaped and new realities are shaped. And when we speak of love, and sometimes I think it can be helpful for persons to have this analogy, when we speak of love, in one sense, we have love, we embrace love, but we are hopefully wise enough to know that the significance of love is always more than what we've embraced. It's challenging. The way by which I am certainly loving family and friends. And yet, though I am instructed by Jesus to love enemies, that becomes a whole new reality. I was leading a retreat a couple of weeks ago, and in talking with one of the retreatants about forgiveness and loving enemies, her response was, "I'm not there yet." And I get that. I get that. But it is to suggest that this matter of love, this matter of hope, is more than simply what we control, what we possess, how we give it instructions. And I think perhaps our challenge is to surrender to the meaning and the power and the guidance of hope rather than to distort the meaning of hope to basically fix our anxieties about where hope may be leading us, because hope leads us into places that can often be not only disturbing, but dangerous, because when you begin to deal with issues of justice and suffering, you are not just doing that out of a comfort zone or even a safe zone.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think that distinction is so helpful, because I often hear people talk about hope like, don't you have hope? And it's like, well, I don't have hope so much as I am had by hope, or I'm held by
Yes.
hope. And I think that sense of the power of the divine is an empowering force to us. And I love that
Yeah.
shift in thinking. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Luther, both Christine and I suffer from chronic illnesses, chronic pain diseases. And you talk about people with chronic illnesses throughout the book, which we deeply appreciate. You say that the enlivening power of hope can lift a person despite their suffering. And, we know that there's not a cure per se for some conditions, that some people are going to suffer with their pain or their, conditions that it's never going to go away in their lifetime. So can you talk about how the enlivening power of hope can lift us? And can you explain what you mean when you say enlivening?
Yes. To provide, I think, the most fundamental understanding I have related to this is that hope prevents pain from defining and controlling us. And it is, as you would know, as someone dealing with chronic pain, it's the sort of thing that is not easy to either dismiss. So much of life must be oriented around what is occurring with you. My wife has chronic pain, so both in terms of our being on this journey together and a caretaker, to understand that it's not about dismissing pain or forgetting pain, and it's not even about in some way avoiding anything that reduces your pain, as if pain is the kind of reality we welcome into our lives, because that's not what I'm saying. But it is a difference between experiencing pain and turning one's life over to pain, such that my life is absolutely understood and lived as one of pain, and only that. And so the examples I have in the book are of persons who are dealing with relentless pain, but have found ways by which the pain itself, though continues, does not continue to disrupt their sense of purpose. So Reynolds Price, for example, someone who I speak of in this book, who at one point in dealing with issues occurring with his spinal column, and when asked between 0 and 10, what is your pain level? His response was 12. And Price, in this incredible writing that he does in his book about this ordeal, indicates that he came to a point of discovering a way by which he was able to find himself more creative, more engaged, more purposeful, more appreciative, when the pain itself never went away. And the title of his book, I think, says something to us, I'm getting chills as I even talk about this, where he talks about a whole new life and even a better life, where he understood that, yes, he was experiencing pain, but the pain, to use a phrase that Howard Thurman would sometimes use, the pain was not sitting on the throne of his life and dictating and determining. Now, this, I think, relates to matters of pain. It relates to matters of addiction. It relates to a host of realities that people experience as troublesome. How might we acknowledge what we're having to continue to experience without in some way allowing that to determine who we are and what we are? Honestly, I don't think anyone only wants to be seen as someone in pain and to be, in some sense, having their character missed because persons are only cringing at imagining what you're going through, rather than recognizing that there may be all sorts of dimensions of you that are engaging life and experiencing life, as well as experiencing the pain.
Thank you. I think that's amazing, because there are people that can be in the life of a person with chronic pain who see them in that way. They see them as, this is a person just with pain. I think my ex-husband really saw me in that way. And once he told me, "Oh, you're always sick." And I was so hurt that I wrote a list of things that I did from my bed, like writing books and all of these, making money, making friends and connections, all these things I did from the bed. So it's really encouraging to be affirmed in that, yes, I am far more than my pain. And even though some people may not see that, they may see me as a person who, is sick, and that's how they define me. It's really good to be affirmed in that I'm so much more than that.
Thank you. It's this, and I think hope does this for us. It enlivens us. Sometimes it enlivens other people to see us, but I need to be enlivened to see within myself that which is more than difficult, constraining, and as you know, when you have a pain, you have to acknowledge it. It's but it's like an athlete who is in a race, and just when you feel as if this body is going beyond anything else that is experienced, there is a sense of purpose that often makes the pain part of the race rather than an intrusion on the race. And hope, I think, can enliven us to, yes, pain is happening. And sometimes it's a matter of going deeper into the pain to really be more alive. And this is especially true as we talk about issues of beloved community and social justice. if we have people who are always standing outside of what they believe to be is an upcoming experience of pain or difficulty, we never get to beloved community that way. We never enter the fray of dealing with matters of justice. But there are times when we have to, in some way, offer ourselves to pain and suffering that we will take on. And this is where, Howard Thurman speaks of suffering as a discipline, not just as something that happens to us, but as a spiritual discipline. There are times in which pain and suffering is chosen as a means by which we are faithful to the calling upon our life to be engaged in caring for others and in discovering depths of ourselves that we would not discover otherwise. And I'll just say that one of the, I speak in the book about, for over 50 years, having what I call my therapy files and having this collection of articles and cartoons and stories. And one of those that spoke deeply to me is regarding a woman who has spent most of her life in an iron lung. And yet her joy came especially in mentoring students from her iron lung when they would be coming back from school. And this just delighted her. It inspired her, but it inspired others. And she could give an account of these students' lives that had been in some way deeply, deeply informed by their time together. That also drove for me the significance of hope in a situation where she wasn't getting out of the iron lung, but neither was she captive to the iron lung.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I so appreciate that too, because I think what I most appreciated was, and particularly in light of the chronic pain and illness conversation, was that, you weren't talking about the hope of cure necessarily, because for a lot of us, there isn't a cure. And so where does the hope lie? And I love the way that you just expressed that, and the beauty of opening up the depths of things that are part of who we are, that are so much bigger than just our pain condition. So I want to make sure we tend to some of the beautiful practices that you suggest in your book. And because our community, Abbey of the Arts, is very much centered in contemplative ways of life, I really loved your chapter on contemplative prayer. And I wonder if you could say more about how contemplative prayer helps us to hear hope, what hope is saying to us. You talked about hope's song singing, which is such a beautiful image. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. There is so much of an understanding of prayer as only being petition. And petition is an aspect of prayer. But praying is, yes, in some ways, you almost have to have petition to sort of clear the decks to move to some other dimensions of this conversation that we're having as prayer. And when I think of even prayer as petition, I don't think that I'm informing God about things God doesn't know. But I do believe it's important for me to hear myself announce, this is what's going on with me. So contemplative prayer has this important dimension of listening to oneself, as well as listening to that which is beyond oneself, that perhaps comes only when we have created a space and a time when we're not simply focused on speaking. It may be around a particular matter, but a matter about which we are willing to hear something coming from the depths. And I cite, for example, the Quakers talking about the hidden teacher within us. what does it mean that I have within myself a kind of mentor and guide, and all given by God, that's for me. But if I have in some way created a life for myself that is always moving, that is always speaking, that is always in some way failing to truly listen to what emerges from the depths, what emerges from an environment in which I've quieted enough to receive this. I'm going to fail the very presence of hope that is within me, given by God, the very presence of hope that is even within relationships given by God, for the failure to know how to listen deeply, to listen deeply. And I think contemplative prayer is not just about how I'm listening to myself, but how am I also listening to other persons? And it relates, as I say in the book, to, I think, all of the other practices in a profound way. The way in which we listen to the prophets, the way in which we listen to other people as we're crossing identity boundaries, the way in which we are listening in the midst of conflict, the way in which we're listening in the midst of celebration. And it's a way in which we can tutor ourselves through prayer, at times, not to, in some way, hear a word that is a recipe for addressing what may be distressing, but sometimes just the experience of the not just the silence. Thurman liked to make the distinction between silence and quiet, not just the silence, but a kind of quietness, a kind of environment in which I experience myself being still, and a kind of delight in stillness that I perhaps had only assumed would come through activity. And it's almost like getting to know yourself again, or dimensions of yourself that had been absent, that there is more of you in the room than what you're able to produce out of your computer, out of your reading, sometimes even out of a telephone call. There is more of you in the room. And we will find ourselves, I think, often missing ourselves if we are assuming that we have taken ourselves fully seriously when we haven't. And contemplative prayer is this matter of listening deeply to me in a way that I hear me differently, how I hear God's presence in me and in others differently. And I believe it's more of a process than just a moment. So that, yes, we listen deeply, but it's also important for us to discern what we've heard. I know, Christine, looking at your bio, the way in which you've engaged the mystics, a mystic vision is not always very clear what it means when it occurs. And so there needs to be some discerning, and it's like Saint Francis, when God says, repair my church. Francis, thinking at first this means to physically repair the church, when something deeper was actually meant. So this sense in which I have this experience in contemplative prayer of what I hear from myself, what I hear from others, what I hear from beyond myself. How do I then discern that? And then how do I enact what I've discerned so that it's not just a matter of, oh, this is for me, but I live the rest of my days as if I've never heard it. It's a cherished moment. It's a treasured moment, but something is also calling forth a transformation of engagement, and prayer is that. So I believe it's important that we understand contemplative prayer as both a deepening for discerning in life, for engaging in life, and that also deeply relates to the possibilities how each one of us not only can be, but should be engaged in matters of justice and beloved community.
Yeah, I so appreciate that this was the first practice, and I really read it as like the foundation for the rest. How do we engage in justice, and how do we show up? And I was thinking as you were talking, well, both about our little conversation before we started about your turtles being your animal of, reminder of slowness. And then there's this philosopher, Bayo Akamalafe, who says, these times are urgent, slow down.
Yes.
And I love that because I think it's so counterintuitive, and it's what's neat. I think we rush so often because there are such urgent problems and catastrophes and horrors and all of that, and yet the gift of slowing down is that we might hear that deeper wisdom to be able to engage in a more authentic way for the justice. So anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate all
Thank
of
you.
that.
Luther, in chapter 2, you wrote, "The cloud of witnesses is a cloud of stories." And in chapter 3, you write about a young dancer named Taylor and her relationship to the ancestors. In the Christian tradition, we venerate the saints. In some traditions, we venerate the saints. And Black people, we have venerated the ancestors from Africa all the way through the experience of chattel slavery to me having ancestor altar right there with my grannies and my sister and obituaries and stuff that they like and flowers. And how do we connect to the saints and to the ancestors in a way that gives us hope?
Mm-hmm. And for me, it relates very much to what we've just been focused on, that is listening. And how am I listening to the ancestors? Because they have narratives, many of which have come through the oral tradition. And I think of my ancestors that have narratives that come through the Negro spirituals. And to take that seriously, as Howard Thurman focused on the spirituals as those theological messages that are some of the most creative in human history. And I think Thurman is right. And I hear the ancestors in the spirituals and their declaration about what it means to, in some way, rejoice and engage and to be alive in the midst of the most oppressive situations that one can experience in this whole human narrative. One of my ancestors, Claudia, is actually was born in Lexington. And this was at a time before Lexington was part of Kentucky, but was actually part of Virginia. And my mother would continually speak about her grandfather in such admirable ways because he was deeply engaged in matters of justice, in dealing with discrimination in St. Louis, Captain Charlton Hunt Tandy, and just an important figure of history that is known by some historians, but not many. But in my family, we knew about Captain Charlton Hunt Tandy. So this witness of my ancestor was not only inspiring my mother, and believe me, it was so inspiring for her that when my mother ever was flying by herself and I was at the airport to meet her, whoever was accompanying my mother as a stranger, if they didn't remember my mother's name, they remembered the name of Captain Charlton Hunt Tandy, because she was going to tell them about the captain in that short flight that they would be having to visit with us in Atlanta. So it's that kind of awareness of the ancestors are speaking to us. They're not just speaking to their time, they are speaking to us in our time. But it's important for us to take them seriously, to listen, to be aware that there is great variance among them. It's not just as if they're all the same in any way, but to appreciate how their witness occurred with that kind of diversity, even among them. This is vital, and some of the conflict we have, I believe, especially in the United States, but in across the world, is the way in which persons have either misread their ancestors or they may be embarrassed by their ancestors. And so they don't want to, in some way, have the present experienced as if somehow or another bringing the ancestors into the room is crucial to whatever the conversations we're having, especially as we're crossing identity boundaries. My ancestors are always in the room with me. Yes. And if you don't think it's important to see them, even after I've indicated it's important to see them, this is something that has to be worked through, just like I might be calling on you to talk about your ancestors because I see them and I may be not seeing them fully, and I need you to tell me more about them. But let's not fool ourselves to think somehow or another we are people together divorced from our past.
I love that so much. Thank you.
I want to kind of continue on that thread of thought around the crossing identity boundaries that you've mentioned a couple of times and is one of your practices in the book, because I really loved your breaking open the story of Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman in that way that was crossing an identity boundary, and that you talk about Jesus himself being transformed in that encounter, which I hadn't ever really thought about that way. So I loved that. So I wonder if you could tell us more about this journey across identity boundaries as the work of hope, and how it contributes to justice, and maybe start with a little bit about that particular gospel story, because I think it's a really powerful image for what you're exploring.
Yeah. This matter of crossing identity boundaries, I think, is crucial to beloved community and to dealing with justice, especially as we find ourselves interacting with opponents to what we believe is really vital to justice and beloved community. So how do I, in some way, connect with another individual in understanding what is occurring within this person, what informs the sense of identity, and how our capacity to move forward in a conversation or to be stuck in a conversation relates to how this individual is defining oneself. And it's not just a conversation to change that individual, but I need to be acknowledging these realities, these identity markers, as I describe them. If our conversation is to have more of a creative outcome than perhaps we have had in the past, or as we're getting introduced. And how am I aware of my identity markers, such that I'm reacting to, or maybe overreacting to persons who are very awkward or abusive as they relate to something in my identity that they may not even be completely aware of, but I'm aware of it and I'm reacting to it. So it's really calling forth a kind of sensitivity about who we are as persons, who others are, and the sense in which if we're open-hearted, we see these engagements as ones of possible transformation beyond anything that we could have imagined. So when Jesus meets this Syrophoenician woman, or in another text, the Canaanite woman, when Jesus meets her and she's begging for him to come and provide healing for her daughter, her beloved child, and he dismisses her by saying that, you know, I was called for the house of Israel and for the children of Israel. Why should food be given to the dogs when the children are in need? And even the disciples are upset with her. There's in the scripture, you don't have any sense of Jesus welcoming this encounter. He speaks about God's calling upon him and his focus there. And this has been problematic for the church because it doesn't sound like sweet Jesus. So there have been all of these other interpretations as to what's going on. Some would say, you know, Jesus, he gets what's going on with this woman. He's going to care for her. He welcomes her, but he's needing to give the disciples some instruction. And therefore, he sets up this kind of opposition so that they can come to the awareness of how deep this woman's faith is. And so it's a teaching moment. And then there have been those scholars who have, when Jesus refers to the dogs, he said, well, you know, among the Syrophoenicians, dogs were pets. So he's not really saying something negative. You get all these ways by which Jesus is somehow or another truly not distancing himself from this woman's need. But I think it's important that the text may be disclosing to us something about how Jesus is open to God's presence, not only with him, but beyond him.
Mm-hmm.
It comes to him in this woman
Mm-hmm.
who understands she has a calling as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
And how her heart is moved, and she speaks it, and Jesus listens to her. He listens to her beyond listening to the resistance of the disciples. And there is something of her commitment, her devotion that stirs within him, such that his response is one of empathy, of caring, and giving her the assurance that her daughter is healed. Now, that's the kind of transformation that is, for me, one that elevates Jesus as someone I should be following with an understanding of how the most deep convictions I have about something must always remain open and available to the kind of transforming encounter that I have not anticipated, and would lead me in my enemy and my family and my friend and myself to become new, to be enlivened anew. That's, I realize for others, the idea of Jesus being taught is problematic for some. And of course, we all know about these scriptures that did not make it into the canon, where Jesus knows everything from childhood and is really described as a terror. in the community in terms of what he does to people went out of this sense of all-knowing and all-power. And so fortunately, I think they're not part of the canon, but I think we follow a Jesus who is open-hearted, engaged, listening, and ready for transformation. And this hopefully can inspire us to understand what our own calling should be and what our own calling must be. And in many ways, it's the crossing of these identity boundaries that takes us to this new awareness. Sometimes with a friend we've known for many years, and our capacity to go deeper in the relationship than we've ever been, sometimes going deeper within ourselves than we've ever been, and often going putting ourselves in experiences with people of a different religion, a different race, a different ethnicity, a different economic standing. And I would hope that our social activism on behalf of beloved community is occurring with this deepening of each one of us as we are making the relationship connections. I'm not saying you have to make the relationship connections before you're attending to the kind of legal work, the laws, the protests that are important for addressing the needs of beloved community. But I don't think the relationship connections should be omitted from this engagement we have for justice and beloved community. Otherwise, we'll have a change in laws, but not necessarily a change of heart. And sometimes the change in laws is necessary to provide environments where we can have a change of heart. We're able to gather and we see one another more. But each one of us must be attentive to how a change in a law does not in itself attend to what each one of us may need in terms of understanding the realities of someone who's incarcerated, are the realities of a child who's been sexually trafficked, are the realities of persons who are homeless. Each one of us has to be taking seriously what it means for me, for my meanness, not meanness, but my meanness, to in some way have the experience of another where I see more deeply that person than I have ever seen this person and their tribe. and hopefully I am seen more deeply than I have known myself to be seen by someone who is different in some way. It's this possibility that I think becomes opportunities of joy for us, even when a law doesn't change, opportunities of absolute newness and being enlivened to realities, even when there's a failure in the society at large to be attending to, dealing with mass incarceration or working with a diversity of homeless people that are struggling. There's something in me that is transformed and changed. And as of course, especially I think in the epilogue of Hope is Here, I talk about Jesus didn't change everything. Jesus fed people, and some of those same people were likely to be hungry in the days that followed. Jesus healed people, and everybody eventually died. All sorts of, but how are we signs of love and hope and transformation and God's presence with us through love and hope in ways that, in some sense, everything with us becomes different in the way in which we have been enlivened to life, more engaged with life, and life has been enlivened in us.
Mm. So beautiful. I just want to say amen. And I think that's a beautiful place to close this conversation, which has been so rich. And thank you so much, Luther. You've been just a wonderful presence with us, and your book, Hope is Here, is a really beautiful read. Spiritual Practices for Pursuing Justice and Beloved Community. I'd say definitely if you want an infusion of hope, and who doesn't, I would say, then this is a beautiful book to read to give us that that sense of how we carry on to do the important work. So thank you.
Thank you for this invitation and for this opportunity to have some connection with those who are involved in this ministry that you're doing. Thank you.